meeting of the Netherland Inn Exchange Place Association. I'm Mark Selby, the current president. We're glad you're here. The plans for the evening are, of course, we'll have supper, and then you see the agenda before you on the table. When we get ready to head toward the serving line over here, what we'll need to do is just everybody still continue visiting among yourself, but we'll need to stagger it a little bit so that we don't have everybody waiting in line for a half an hour. So we're going to start with this table up front here on my right. These first three tables will make their way back, and then as you see that these fill back in, we'll start with the next three tables, and then likewise the last three tables back there. So with that being said, well, what can I say? If you would please, let's see, do we have any announcements from the staff as far as Marshall? Hey, Marshall. Do we have any announcements from that corner back there as far as the bar in the corner? Anything we need to know? For food, for raiment, for life, for opportunities, for friendship and fellowship, we thank thee, O Lord. Amen. All right, feel free to start the line, and we thank you all for being here. Friends, if I could have your attention, please. We've come to the part of the program that we'll be transitioning into some of our featured speakers tonight, but I also want to recognize that we do have several other guests among us that have come from other historical societies around the area, and we are very grateful to you all for coming. Anybody else that's visiting here this evening, we feel especially honored that you're here, and this is my little sales pitch. You know, this is the Netherland Inn Exchange Place Association, and as such, the association is the umbrella that under which the Netherland Inn Exchange Place and Hammond House operate. Each site operates independently, but the association has got a governing board, and you'll see on your table tonight that we have the new slate for board members. Each site has got its own separate steering committee that operates with their own site steering chairs and organizations such as that. The association then, one of the main purposes serves as a funding mechanism for our sites. So if you are not a member of the association, I'd like to extend an invitation to you. I have tonight the membership forms that tells everything that you ever wanted to know but were afraid to ask. If you would like to have one of these, please see me as well. There will be some over here on the table. Later on this evening, there are some other things on the table over here that we'll have a break in a little while, and that will be an opportunity that you can pick up some of the documents such as the bylaws and the financial statements. Okay, with that, Marshall, if you would like to come and introduce our first guest.
Thank you, Mark. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Really appreciate you being here. Also like to thank Food City for making this room available and for providing us with an outstanding meal, as they always do. And I also wanted to thank the Kingsport Times-News for doing a really good job on giving us some nice publicity last weekend. I don't know if you saw they had a full-page spread with pictures and their stories section on the Sunday paper, so I wanted to thank them for that. All right, we have two wonderful guest speakers tonight. I'm going to introduce the first one, and lucky you, I get to introduce the second one too. Our first speaker is Mr. Sam Compton. He is president of the Boone Society. Mr. Compton is originally from Nashville, Tennessee, and he was elected president of the Boone Society 6 years ago now, in 2010. One thing I find completely fascinating is that his wife, Carolyn, who is here with him tonight, is a direct descendant of Hannah Boone, who was Daniel Boone's youngest sister. So I'm sure there's, but actually, Mr. Compton, I'll bet your wife could tell some good stories too. But he's here tonight to talk to us about the Boone Trace Project, and we will let him explain all this, but we just wanted to thank him for coming, making the trip, and we appreciate Mr. and Mrs. Compton being here. He's going to tell us a little bit about the Boone Society, but mostly about what's going to be happening, and it's a really exciting thing that's going to be happening here in the first part of May. So, Mr. Compton, if you will, come on up.
Thank you, Marshall. That was a great introduction, and I don't know if I deserve that much or not. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to speak to you tonight about a very important subject. And it's a subject that all of us, I'm sure, when I get through with my talk, you're going to understand our purpose, and I think you're going to agree with the endeavor that we are upon. When they first recruited me for the president of the Boone Society, I said, well, I'm a Boone-in-law, but I'm not blood Boone, and I don't know a whole lot about Daniel Boone. Well, that was 6 years ago. They told me, said, we know about Daniel Boone. We need somebody that can run this organization. And I said, well, I can do that. But over 6 years, I've studied a lot about Daniel Boone and the Westward Movement, and I've fallen in love with the subject. I expect the rest of my life I'm going to be doing promotional work for America's frontier history. Now, the Boone Society, their mission is to preserve the legacy of the Boone family, and especially Daniel Boone. When I became president, I wanted to grow beyond that. That's great for the 300 and some odd descendant members of the Boone Society, and we are in 39 states and 3 foreign countries, so we're not that small of an operation. But we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and so we don't have a large staff, and most of our people are scattered across the country. But I wanted to move it to a different level. I wanted to invite membership to come as historians, friends, and supporters of our movement. So we broadened it to preserving America's frontier history, and that is a huge footprint. We realized that to follow the steps of Daniel Boone, you not only have to start where he was born and where he died, but you have to focus upon the real contribution that he made for this nation. If I was the interviewer on the street and I asked what's Daniel Boone most noted for, I'd probably get frontiersman, long hunter, and certainly that name comes up of Indian fighter. But that's not what he was. That's not his largest contribution. And I'll tell you, the TV series of Fess Parker, bless his heart, but that didn't do us any favor. There was no coonskin cap. Daniel Boone wore a broad brim Quaker hat. And they get that mixed up a little bit, I think, maybe with Davy Crockett. But television sort of skews things in a direction. But we were missing the fact that there's a great history here. That history is fading fast. If you look around the room, we have several generations of people here. I feel it is our responsibility to resurrect America's frontier history and to educate the public, and especially the youth, grades 4 through 6, about America's frontier history so that they can take it into the future. We cannot, with our generations, let this history die. And it really is on a downhill slide right now. So, in order to work on the project, when I began to study the real footprint of the westward movement, yes, it was in Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky, and Missouri. And there's been projects going on in some of those states to preserve America's frontier history. One of them is right up here in Virginia with the Daniel Boone Wilderness Trail Association and the projects that they've done for tourism. So when I did a thorough study over a few months, I figured the weakest link right now, believe it or not, is in Kentucky. And Kentucky's sitting on a gold mine of opportunity with the legacy of Daniel Boone. But there's enough Boone grocery stores and laundromats and places along the highways up there. But we needed a real project that could project out not just nationally but internationally. And believe it or not, over in Europe, Daniel Boone's name is as big over there as it is over here. So what we did was we wanted to do an extension of what Virginia's Daniel Boone Wilderness Trail Association has done. Because if people start traveling in tourism here at the Netherland Inn and start moving up the trail that Daniel Boone blazed in 1775, we don't want them to stop at the Cumberland Gap. We want them to continue on over the mountain and all the way up to Fort Boonesboro. And that leg is the one that we've been working on for 4 years. So we're trying to develop a tourism corridor and we call it a living classroom. Now when they get over in Kentucky, we've come up with a series of welcome centers that act as interpretive centers, and it's a living classroom is what it is. People will be able to go over there in tourism and travel along station to station and learn about the history of the westward movement. Now there's a lot of details about the Boone Trace. There is a brochure lying on your table that will tell you a whole lot about that. But I've got a limited amount of time here and I want to cover the big story. We're going to cut the ribbon in the month of May up in Kentucky. It'll start at the Cumberland Gap with the ribbon cutting and go all the way up through the county seats and up to Fort Boonesboro and beyond to Lexington. But to promote America's frontier history, we've included 3 states in our promotional project in May. We will start at May the 7th, Sycamore Shoals. I met with them today. We will reenact the treaty and the land purchase from the Cherokee that Colonel Richard Henderson did. And of course then he turned around and hired Daniel Boone to blaze a trail up to Fort Boonesboro for new settlement and land sales. Well, something a lot of people don't realize is 2 or 3 years after that, he hired James Robertson and John Donaldson to cut a pathway into Tennessee, and that's what developed Fort Nashboro in Tennessee. Both of them were on a parallel mission. And so that's how the westward movement started. Over a period of 20 years, from 1775, there's 200,000 to 300,000 settlers poured through that Cumberland Gap to form a new nation. Now folks, that's pretty huge. And that's what we need to teach people about how this nation developed. I could talk to you all night, why that happened. The colonies, the barrier mountains of the Appalachians, the British and their involvement with the Indians. I mean, there's so much historical detail about what happened, and people don't really realize this. I spoke in front of a group about like this 3 or 4 months ago in Nashville, and it was a group of historians. And before I started, I said, how many of you know where the Cumberland Gap is. One person held their hand up, and I was shocked. I didn't expect that. So that's how much opportunity and work we've got to do to educate people and remind them of America's frontier history. So let's get back to the expedition in May. We're going to start at Sycamore Shoals. We're going to have 8 frontiersmen on horseback that are going to ride from here to Lexington, Kentucky, over 230 miles. Now, when I say they're going to ride, for the safety, we're going to have to trailer them at certain places. We have a schedule that we've got to keep up because we've got a whole program of interpretive sites and opportunities along the way. We go from Sycamore Shoals to the Netherland Inn. We go from Netherland Inn up to Natural Tunnel State Park and the Anderson Blockhouse. We go from there to Martin Station. We will be there at Martin Station during their annual raid event. On May the 13th, we will make an outdoor presentation in front of 3,000 school children on that Friday. And there's also school presentations that the individual counties and sites are setting up because, as I say, our whole movement is about education. These frontier riders are going to be educators, and they'll make demonstrations on gunsmithing, blacksmithing, cooking, even salt making, and all of the things that were necessary on the trail in the 1700s, late 1700s. So, and then our star rider is Stephen Cottle. Stephen Cottle is a longtime presenter of Colonel Daniel Boone himself. And Stephen, in period clothing, he looks like Daniel Boone, and the reason he does, he's a Boone descendant himself. He has Boone blood. Stephen last Tuesday, Stephen spoke on the floor of the Kentucky Legislature House and had 4 minutes to make a pitch about Colonel Daniel Boone, and he spoke in first person. You can see that if you will go to the Boone Society Facebook page. You can find that by going to boonesociety.org, click on our Facebook icon, and you can see that posting and see that speech yourself, and it is impressive. He got a standing ovation. It took a half an hour to get the house back in order because all of the people wanted to come up and have their picture made with Daniel Boone, autographs, etc. But he's going to be here, and he's the one on every Sunday of our venture. It will last 3 weeks and 4 weekends. There's 3 Sundays in that event. And Colonel Daniel Boone is going to preach Sunday morning services at each one of those Sunday morning opportunities. So there's so much to tell you about the details of what's going to happen. But you're going to see national exposure on this. We're also hooking up with a stable out of Richmond, Kentucky, that's going to furnish the horses. That stable does horse therapy for people. And the part that I like about it is they do horse therapy for wounded war veterans. So we're going to be raising money for that stable to help wounded war veterans. You can make any kind of donation. We're going to ask for donations of hay, oats, anything that people physically want to share with us out of their own barn, etc. But the public will have an opportunity to make donations. If they want a program, it costs $30 an hour to give therapy to a wounded war veteran. And we're going to ask the public, please sponsor at least 1 hour for a veteran to be able to receive the therapy that he needs as a wounded war veteran. We're working with negotiation right now with some of the celebrities out of Nashville as spokespersons to help us elevate this message to a national focus. A lot of those things are still under works, and we'll see what happens. But there's so much going to happen in that, and we're in hopes that you will come and visit some of our locations in your particular area, enjoy what we have, and I'm going to ask you to personally do all you can to spread the word about America's frontier history. It is so important to all of us. I will be hanging around if any of you want to come up and ask any questions later. I'll be here as long as we need to this evening. Folks, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Compton. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Compton? It's just so exciting. I just think this is going to be such an awesome event. The first time I heard about it was Sherry Cox told me a little bit about it back in December, and it just got me all excited. Yeah, there she is. You can hide your face, but you're the one that got it started. It's great. Thank you again very much. And as Mr. Compton said, he will be here when we have a break. Feel free to talk to him. I know I am going to. Our next speaker is from East Tennessee State. And I got to tell you, my wife and I moved here 7 years ago. And we moved here because we wanted to get away from heat and humidity. You laugh. Where we came from, the humidity was generally 80%, and that was a good day. So when people talk, when guys get on the weather and they say, oh, it's going to be humid tomorrow, it's going to be 44%, my wife and I'll just laugh. That's nothing. So we wanted to come to a nice area with smaller population, heat and humidity, and we found all sorts of wonderful things here, including Exchange Place and Netherland Inn and Hammond House. And we also found this absolutely fabulous music program at East Tennessee State. And Dr. Olson is part of that. He teaches Appalachian Studies at ETSU. He has written liner notes for several documentary albums on Appalachian music, including 4 box sets for the Bear Family Records. The Bristol Sessions, 1927 to 28, you've heard of those. The Johnson City Sessions, 1928 and 29. Knoxville Sessions, 29 and 30. And a compilation of Tennessee Ernie Ford's early recordings. They just had an exhibit up at the Museum of Country, Birthplace of Country Music. They just had a thing about Tennessee Ernie Ford. He's written liner notes for 2 albums for the Great Smoky Mountain Association. He's the author or editor of numerous books. I envy him that. Which includes poetry. He also plays the guitar, the old-time banjo, sings traditional Appalachian songs and ballads. He is going to be talking to us tonight about the historic music of this region. He's going to talk to us and he's going to play for us. So we're going to have, in words and music, a history of Appalachian music. Please welcome Dr. Ted Olson.
As he's finishing getting ready, I should mention sorry about that. Tonight's presentation is being videoed, as you can see up here. These videos are available for purchase. If you would be interested in one of those, there are some cards that are over here on this side table. Feel free to pick one of those up, and you can contact him for more information. I think the CD is $20. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're giving back.
And then if you get one tonight and tonight only, well, no, but if you do get one, he's going to make a donation back to the association, a $5 donation, so that would be another little fundraiser to help us keep the lights on for another year.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Not sure if you folks can hear me, but we'll adjust accordingly. It's a real pleasure to be with you here tonight, and thank you, Marshall, for the invitation to this event. Thanks to all of you for caring about these important parts of our history, and I really enjoyed Sam's presentation. That was very inspiring. Daniel Boone is somebody that I discovered quite young. Of course, I was of the generation who watched Fess Parker acting on television, acting historically kind of incorrectly in some ways, but it instilled a passion for learning about history in many people, including myself. Many years later, some years later, I was a park ranger with the Blue Ridge Parkway, and one of the historical sites in my district of the Blue Ridge Parkway was Boone's Trace, where it came up over the Blue Ridge, and we would have site talks where I would basically talk to tourists about Daniel Boone there. I kind of kept following Daniel Boone around because I ended up for a while at Union College in Barberville, Kentucky, and of course we have the Boone Festival and Daniel Boone's mark everywhere in that part of Kentucky. And then of course I worked with the fine folks at the Cumberland Gap National Historical Site on a number of projects. There's a movie that you can see at the Visitor Center when you go there. It's free of charge. It's been showing now for about 10 years, I guess. If you look very carefully, you'll see yours truly sitting there in period costume playing some music in their introductory video. Basically, I worked with the firm that made the film, and we brought some period music to the film. And of course, the star of the film is Daniel Boone, of course, a great inspiring figure. I did write a book in 1998 called Blue Ridge Folk Life, and Daniel Boone figures prominently in that book. There's a long chapter or section about Daniel Boone's history. And so the idea of keeping that history alive and teaching it to the next generation, that's what we do every day at East Tennessee State University. I'm going to start off with a song. This is, I'm going to put out an invitation for this to be a sing-along. And if so, if you feel brave, and if you feel digested, here's how the chorus goes. I'm working on the new railroad with mud up to my knees. Working on the new railroad with mud up to my knees. Digging for Big John Henry, he's so hard to please. I have been all around this world. Everybody, I'm working on the new railroad with mud up to my knees. Working on the new railroad with mud up to my knees. Digging for Big John Henry, he's so hard to please. I have been all around this world. Once I had a big fine horse, Darrow was his name. Once I had a big fine horse, and Darrow was his name. Till he caught me making whiskey, and I had to leave my claim. I have been all around this world, and I'm working on the new railroad, mud up to my knees. Working on the new railroad with mud up to my knees. Digging for Big John Henry, he's so hard to please. I've been all around this world. Single girl, spend all your days in town. Single girl, spend all your days in town. For as soon as you get married, you'll work till the sun goes down. I have been all around this world, and I'm working on the new railroad, mud up to my knees. Working on the new railroad with mud up to my knees. Digging for Big John Henry, he's so hard to please. risky hook and line. When you go courting, never look back behind. I have been all around this world, and I'm working on the new railroad with mud up to my knees. Working on the new railroad with mud up to my knees. Digging for Big John Henry, he's so hard to please. I have been all around this world. The new railroad is finished, boys. The cars are on the track. The new railroad is finished, boys, and the cars are on the track. And if our women leave us, nothing gonna bring them back. I have been all around this world, and I'm working on the new railroad with mud up to my knees. Working on the new railroad with mud up to my knees. Digging for Big John Henry, he's so hard to please. I have been all around this world. Thank you. That was great, guys. Music is an important kind of vehicle for getting our history to the next generation, or to people who have, in generations well established, kind of forgotten about certain historical events. When I worked with the Park Service, one of the things I liked to do the most, because I'd be asked to give these programs at campgrounds, was to give programs of folk songs and folk ballads. Because my reasoning, this music is entertaining, of course, but even more importantly, it's the vehicle for stories of the past to be presented to people of the present, in the words of the people who originally lived that experience and sang that experience. This song we just heard, Working on the New Railroad, maybe a century old now. Not that frontier history that we were talking about earlier, but history that's probably predates most people today who are active. The history of the arrival of industrialization to the mountains. And that brought great change to people and to their lives and their experiences. Created a situation where a lot of people weren't sure exactly how they were going to pay their property taxes or put food on the table. And it really challenged people. And the railroad provided jobs, and a lot of people took that opportunity, but it also created, distanced themselves from their more traditional ways of life, of maybe farming and gathering of food in the forest and this sort of thing. The kind of mixed way of life involving self-sustaining skills of early frontier era Appalachian people. So the arrival of the railroad was the kind of the foreshadowing of all the changes that came in the 20th century. One thing that I've done since that time of being a park ranger is I've moved on to becoming a professor at various schools, first Maryville College and then Union College and now ETSU. And when I arrived at ETSU in 1999, I realized that people talked about certain musical events that had happened nearby, such as the Bristol Sessions. But people were talking about them perhaps from a perspective that almost romanticized them to the point where we really didn't understand the full extent of what they were saying when they talked about the Bristol Sessions. So I worked with a colleague of mine named Charles Wolfe, who's a well-respected scholar. He passed away 10 years ago. But before that happened, we worked on a project that was the first ever historical investigation into the, shall we say, the true story of the Bristol Sessions, rather than kind of the romanticized mythic history. And we published a book called The Bristol Sessions, Writings About the Big Bang of Country Music. And I worked with the the Carters, and I worked with a number of other scholars, and we put together a book, Jimmy Rogers' Descendants and this sort of thing, and the Stoneman Descendants, and we came up with the kind of the full story of what happened in Bristol. And that book is available, including at the Birthplace of Country Music Museum. But, you know, one thing occurred to me after producing the book is that what really has to happen next is people need to hear the recordings themselves. You know, talking about music is an important thing. I mean, it's part of our history, part of our heritage, but we need to hear the music. We need to hear the actual voices from the past that we were so fortunate in the case of Bristol that those great performers were documented. Because you think of all the wonderful musicians who were never documented. Their stories were never put down on acetate or on reel-to-reel moving into the 40s and 50s. But happily for us, the people in Bristol were documented because that was sessions that was all about documenting people's music for commercial release. And so I worked with a company in Germany that Marshall had mentioned in the intro, Bear Family Records. I don't know if you folks know about Bear Family Records, but I'm going to show you one of the projects that we worked on most recently. Tennessee Ernie Ford, Portrait of an American Singer. This came out last year in 2015. I've done 4 of these with Bear Family. The first one was on the Bristol Sessions. And it was the first time those recordings were ever gathered in one place. What we learned is that, talk about the world fan base for Daniel Boone, there was also a fan base for the Bristol Sessions. Here's one of the songs that was recorded in Bristol in 1927 by none other than the Carter family. Interesting story behind this song. It in fact was taken from a Scottish ballad called The Lass of Loch Royal. And A.P. Carter was quite a fine songsmith. He would take traditional music and rearrange it and produce saleable hits in those early years of country music in the 20s. And this is one of the great Carter family songs from the Bristol Sessions. In fact, it was one of their first 6 records ever made was this one. I'm gone away for to leave you, love. I'm gone away for a while, but I'll return to you somehow if I go 10,000 miles. The storms are on the ocean, heavens may cease to be, this world may lose its motion, love, if I grew false to thee. Who's gonna shoe your pretty little feet? Who's gonna glove your hand? And who will kiss your ruby red lips when I'm in a foreign land? The storms are on the ocean, heavens may cease to be, this world may lose its motion, love, if I grew false to thee. Oh, Daddy will chew my pretty little feet, Mama can glove my hand, and you can kiss my ruby red lips when you return again. The storms are on the ocean, heavens may cease to be, this world may lose its motion, love, if I grew false to thee. Everybody. The storms are on the ocean, heavens may cease to be, this world may lose its motion, love, I grew false to thee. And a song, thank you. A song that came from the European past of our early Appalachian settlers. kind of circulated in these mountains and valleys of Appalachia for generations, and then along comes a very innovative modern songsmith who was taking advantage of the new technologies involved with the recorded sound era and shaped an old ballad into a modern love song that was one of the classics of early country music. The Storms Are on the Ocean, A.P. Carter. He didn't necessarily write that song, but he arranged it. And the way copyrights worked back then, he gets eternal credit for it. But one gentleman probably helped him with the song, or at least helped him with other songs for which he was given credit as songwriter, and that was a gentleman affiliated with Kingsport, Leslie Riddle. How many of you have heard of Leslie Riddle? Leslie was a great African-American musician. Lived in Kingsport for a number of years before moving up north. Leslie was, he worked in heavy industry until he had an injury and lost part of his leg. He couldn't work anymore in heavy industry, so he became a street musician and a minister, a preacher. Somewhere along the line, A.P. Carter and Maybelle and Sarah, the Carter family, discovered him down in Bristol, or down in Kingsport. They came here and heard him on the street and befriended him. And so there was this alliance formed between an African-American musician who was brilliant. Leslie Riddle was absolutely brilliant, as was in his own way A.P. Carter. The alliance was formed. They traveled around the back roads of Upper East Tennessee and Southwest Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, meeting people, gathering music, and A.P. transcribed that music and the Carter family recorded it. So it's kind of the backstory to America's first family of country music. They were talented, and they were at the right place at the right time. Bristol and the country music industry as it was emerging. But they didn't do it alone, and they relied upon people such as Leslie Riddle to help them. By the way, Leslie Riddle eventually, 3 decades later, made his own record, and you can hear that. It's on the Rounder label, and it's brilliant material. He was quite a singer. It took him till the 60s to actually record for himself. The only thing I can say about that is, remember, this was 1927. There was segregation in the South. So the fact that the Carter family worked with him so closely and befriended him at a time when he really needed maybe a little financial help speaks, I think, well of their open-heartedness. They certainly had an open mind and an open heart toward Leslie Riddle, and I think that that's an important part of the Appalachian music story that we're trying to tell in these box sets that we've produced. The Bristol Sessions box set came out in 2011. We were very blessed to receive 2 Grammy nominations for that, so we kind of took the story to the world through that and through the promotion of the box set in Europe and Japan. The best fallout possible that came from that experience was that the company was willing to take a chance on a second box set. Mind you, these box sets retail for $150 or so. They're collector's items. They're really not meant for the mass market or anything like that. But for true music fans, they've been very popular. But the company gave a chance on a second project that was called the Johnson City Sessions box set, 1928 and 29. How many of you were aware that, of course, you know about the Bristol Sessions, how many of you are aware that there was a Johnson City Sessions as well? Just a couple hands go up. The Johnson City Sessions, in my opinion, based on having worked with them intimately, are fully the equal of the Bristol Sessions, but different. Johnson City Sessions brought in old-time musicians from all over the Appalachia to Johnson City. So it's more of an old-time set of music as opposed to early country music, which was the Bristol Sessions. So that's one thing I want to say. The work of a, shall we say, a music historian or a music preservationist is that you sometimes don't know the value of the story that you're working upon until maybe it's out and the people are evaluating it for themselves. You know, I can honestly say that when the Johnson City Sessions box set came out, the company in Germany felt like they'd be lucky to sell maybe a few dozen copies or something like that. But when the reviews started coming in from Germany and England and Australia, that this is, this music is profoundly interesting and varied, it did very well for them, and it launched. The fact is now we have a historical marker on the streets of Johnson City that speak of the Johnson City sessions. It wasn't, people in Johnson City didn't know that they were like the folks in Bristol 30, 40 years ago. Now in Johnson City, they're discovering their own history through some of these archival projects. We're now doing a third box set on the Knoxville sessions. And I know that Sam was announcing a very important event that's happening in eastern Kentucky, through this area, Tennessee, Virginia, in May. Well, we've got another event. I don't mean to steal the thunder of what he was saying, because hopefully you can do both. Hopefully there's no overlap of the time frame. But May 5th through 8th, does that interact or conflict with your schedule, May 5th through 8th? Well, I'll just say that at least there's another option there for you guys. It's the Knoxville Sessions, and we'll have a special event in downtown Knoxville celebrating another part of the music heritage of Knoxville. Very different from what happened in Bristol and Johnson City, because the Knoxville Sessions, about 20% of the recordings were of African American blues and gospel music. So another part of the Appalachian music story that's kind of been overlooked. Okay. I'm going to share with you another song here. This is a cappella, as they say, or as a kid at a camp I used to work at once called it a cappella, so without an instrumental accompaniment. The thinnest man I ever knew lived over in Hoboken. If he ever told you how thin he was, you'd think that I was a jokin'. He was as thin as a postage stamp or the skin of a new potato. For exercise, he'd take a ride through the holes of a nutmeg grater. Oh me, oh my, he was the thinnest man. Thin as a soup in a boarding house, or thin as a soft-shelled clam. He'd never go out on a stormy night, he'd never go out alone, for fear that some poor hungry dog would take him for a bone. Whilst sitting by the fire one night, the lamp was a-burning dimly. A bedbug grabbed him by the hair and yanked him up the chimney. Oh me, oh my, he almost lost his breath, fell through a hole in the seat of his pants and choked himself to death. Mighty thin man. I don't have a whole lot of time for you folks, but just a little bit more about the work that I do at East Tennessee State. I teach in the Bluegrass, Old Time, and Country Music Studies program, as Marshall had pointed out. Students come to the program in Johnson City and the Tri-Cities from all over the world. We've had students from Iran and India and Japan and all over Europe and several other nations, places that we haven't mentioned. And also all over North America, Mexico, Canada, and of course the good old US of A. We have students from every state, I think, in the United States we have had in our program, or virtually that's the case. Students come to the classes that we teach and the workshops that we offer, sometimes with incredible talent. And sometimes they're like, we call them tabula rasa, clean slates, ready to learn. One of our alumni, one of the famous alumni of the program was Kenny Chesney. When Kenny Chesney showed up, allegedly he couldn't play the guitar. But now, he's one of the great stars. And so this is the kind of outcome that this program has generated over the years. The program was started in 1984 by Jack Tottle. So credit where credit is due, and others have worked in the program, very, very famous musicians over the years. Frankly, too many to name, but frankly, if you're interested in knowing the full story, I'll be happy to email that to you. One thing that I do, I think one of my special roles is to bring out these historical albums. And my latest project is called Blind Alfred Reed, Appalachian Visionary. Have any of you folks heard of Blind Alfred Reed? If you go to the museum, you have to look hard, because they kind of, when they designed it, they kind of didn't maybe call attention to his role at the Bristol sessions, but hopefully we'll change some of that. He's an overlooked musician who also has produced some of the most lasting songs from the Depression era. I don't know if you folks know Ry Cooder, a famous performer. He sang in 1970 Blind Alfred Reed's most famous song and made it quite famous. How can a poor man stand such times and live? It's one of the anthems of the Depression era. And that's written by a blind man from West Virginia who came to Bristol in 1927 and recorded at the Bristol Sessions. He's one of the great unheralded performers from the Bristol Sessions. Bruce Springsteen covered that same song about 20 years later after the Katrina tragedy. Many other great songs on the set. Well, basically what I did was working with another company, this one called Dust to Digital in Atlanta, we came up with the concept that we need to get this great music out to the world because it's fully in its own way as magical and powerful as the music of Jimmy Rogers and the Carter family and others who recorded at Bristol. It's just not known, but we can maybe bring some adjustment to that fact by simply putting the records out there. So they're now out there, digitally remastered. They sound brilliant by a Grammy Award-winning engineer. And the story of Blind Alfred Reed that was never told is now told in this package, which is really, frankly, more of a book, but there is a CD in it with all these recordings. Two other projects I've worked on, just in a nutshell. About 5 years ago, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park asked me to put out for the public's awareness some field recordings that were made in the Smokies in 1939. These were not commercially made. These were not like the Carter family, Jimmy Rogers, or Blind Alfred Reed. These were not made for commercial distribution. These were documentary recordings made by a folklorist named Joseph Sargent Hall was his name. He was hired from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park to document the culture of people who were being displaced to make the park. So how many of you have been to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park? Virtually all of you. It's America's most visited national park. It's beautiful. It feels like home when you drive through. The irony is 4,000 people gave up their homes to create our shared home of the national park. Their story was never told until recently, and we tried to tell it in this CD called Old Time Smoky Mountain Music. 34 recordings made in 1939 of these folks. So they're older and they're a little bit kind of crackling in the background, but the work done to remaster them has kind of minimized that, and their story is told in this CD. We were very fortunate to have a Grammy nomination for that as well. And then another project in the Smokies, also never before released field recordings by Carol Best and the White Oak String Band. And this music was from the 50s, recorded by the same gentleman, Joseph Sargent Hall, just outside the park. A gentleman named Carol Best had been kind of an unheralded, shall we say, pioneer of bluegrass music. He innovated a style of banjo playing that was called melodic clawhammer banjo. Now, I heard some folks at our table talking about Bela Fleck. Bela Fleck was a gentleman who learned this style very young and has perfected it. But that melodic, that beautiful melodic sound that Bela Fleck and other banjo players of today get, they learn ultimately can be traced back to this gentleman. And he was never credited for introducing the style because he was a farmer who never recorded until many, many years later. But these are the original recordings he made, never released until last year. And so that's the work of a music historian and preservationist, to bring these stories forward. And of course, the Tennessee Ernie Ford box set came out last year. It was an effort to bring a gentleman who was well known, but kind of forgotten unfairly by the American public. And we've kind of brought his story back. And we also received a Grammy nomination for that set as well. So this is what I do, and I'm just delighted to be here tonight. I think I've kind of run out of time, but I do want to take on any questions that you may have about ETSU or about any of these stories that we presented here about Appalachian music. We've got some new projects. Quickly, I'll tell you, 2 CDs of contemporary artists such as Dolly Parton and Norman Blake and many, many other well-known artists. We have recorded them singing the repertoire from these two Smoky Mountain CDs, new versions of older music. Those CDs will be coming out this summer. So I'd be delighted to tell you more about that too, but you'll probably read about that at some point, perhaps in the papers if we're so lucky. But Dolly and Norman and other famous musicians just liked what we were doing and gave of their time and talents. And we're celebrating this old heritage and bringing it into the 21st century in modern dress, but with old-time heart, as they say. Any questions, comments? Folks, if any of you want to see any of these recordings, I'll have them over by the table after we break here. But thank you so much.
So we are going to take a few minutes break. That'll allow Mr. Olson, he'll be set up over here at one of these tables. Take a few minutes and then we will reconvene and transition into the business segment. Do encourage everybody to stick around. We'll be talking about some of the changes that we've made over the past year and the new board that will be coming on. So we thank you once again this evening. And with that, we'll take just about a 5 or 10 minute break.